Tonight on Nova, cigarettes. The United States tries to discourage its own citizens from smoking. But our government is pressing China to buy more American cigarettes.
It is reprehensible for industrial nations to export disease, disability, and death in the way of cigarette smoke.
The popularity of Western ways and American cigarettes is encouraging more young Chinese to light up. Can China kick the habit?
Funding for Nova's 20th anniversary season is made possible by Johnson & Johnson, the signature recognized around the world for commitment to quality healthcare products for the entire family. And Lockheed, America's aerospace company, supporting math, science, and engineering education for national technology leadership. Major funding for Nova is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you.
It was once called the Celestial Empire. And although farmers tilled the soil the same way their ancestors did centuries ago, China has changed dramatically. With these changes has come a better quality of life than ever before. No longer must the vast majority of Chinese worry about diseases which once devastated the poor. These have been largely conquered. But as people live longer and are more affluent, they face diseases unknown to the old China.
Well, 40 years ago in China, when the present government came to power, the chief causes of death were the diseases of poverty. There was malnutrition, infectious disease, famine, warfare, and most of the population would be dead before middle age. More than half of them would be dead before they were the age of 40. So the first priority for the new government was to do something about the infectious diseases, do something about food, and this they did. And now the situation is that more than 90% are going to live to middle age. And so we've now got to do something about the causes of death in middle age, and much the most important single cause of death in middle age is going to be smoking.
Pito predicts that of the children now living in China, almost 200 million are going to smoke cigarettes regularly. Most of the males and a few of the females. And that means that well over 50 million of them eventually will die as a result of the habit. This is the world's biggest smoking problem. Over 300 million Chinese smoke already, keeping demand for cigarettes high. And the government maintains a monopoly on the manufacture of cigarettes, selling them for as little as 90 cents for a pack of 20. While this is bad news for people's health, it's good news for the economy. Tobacco income is China's largest source of revenue.
In 1987, the cigarette industry's contribution was worth $3.4 billion US, which is 7% of our entire national revenue.
Oh yes, the tobacco company makes a lot of money. The health sector, on the contrary, they do not have much money. They always support other places to do the revenue to the government. So it's very difficult to pass the health idea to the tobacco company. And besides, many of the government leaders, they are heavy smokers. They smoke so much daily, and it is very difficult for them to confess that smoking is dangerous to health.
There's very little incentive not to smoke in China. Every boy sees his dad smoke. Party officials smoke. Even the doctor smokes. The health authorities are realizing rapidly, if rather late, that the predictions of massive disease as a result of smoking are probably correct. and that something needs to be done. But governments, which need money to raise living standards, are as addicted to tobacco revenue as smokers are to nicotine. It's a dilemma many governments face: wealth now or health later.
Well, the difficulty in discussing anything about the hazards of smoking in a third world country is the economic issue that they face, because tobacco is a cash product and it's a source of excise taxes. And one can be sympathetic about that. I have sat with many ministers of health of third world countries who all say the same thing to me. We agree with you, but in our government circles, like yours, health is very low on the pecking order. So when health is competing with the Minister of Finance, the Minister of the Interior, the Minister of Commerce, health bills down the road don't count, because cash now is very important.
70% of Chinese men smoke, compared to only 29% of American men. In the U.S. and Britain, illnesses related to smoking kill 1 in 4 smokers before they reach old age. Now it's clear that what Western cigarettes have done to Western hearts and lungs, Chinese cigarettes will do to the Chinese. In Shanghai, the lung cancer wards are full. A survey of 200,000 people, organized by Dr. Gao Wutang, showed that around 80% of lung cancer deaths in Shanghai are caused by smoking. Questionnaires revealed that even in Shanghai, with its air pollution, non-smokers get little lung cancer. But among long-term smokers, lung cancer levels are high, even far from the city's polluted center. Mr. Pan is 45 and has smoked 20 cigarettes a day for over 20 years. He now has lung cancer.
Do you smoke?
Yes. But I stopped this June. On June 18th, after I had an x-ray and found out that I was sick.
5 or 10 years ago, a lot of people didn't believe that there was any relationship between smoking and lung cancer. Not even medical experts. But results of research in recent years, and reports here and abroad, have convinced more and more people in the medical field and other fields that there really are connections between smoking and lung cancer.
Cancer warnings were sounded in the West as long ago as the 1950s, but it took years for them to be taken seriously. Now the Chinese know from their own evidence that if they can reduce the amount of smoking, they can save millions of lives. All they've got to do is persuade 300 million people to quit.
How on earth am I supposed to quit smoking?
Let me tell you. Number one, you can go to a clinic and ask the doctor to prescribe you some medicine. They have Chinese and they have Western medicine. So, that's one way. Or else you can always use acupuncture.
But I've tried all that before. They just don't work.
Then you see, your basic problem is willpower.
The seriousness of the smoking problem was underscored by one of the world's largest studies of the relationship between lifestyle and disease. In a collaboration remarkable for its time, scientists from China and from Cornell and Oxford universities joined forces in 1980 to find out just how people are living and dying in China.
In the last year of his life, Chu Enlai asked the people from the Cancer Institute in Beijing to prepare an atlas showing how cancer varied from one part of China to another. And every type of cancer that is common in one part of China is rare somewhere else. The differences aren't genetic, they're due to the ways in which people live. And so what we wanted to do was to try to find out what it was, how do people live in these different areas.
It would prove to be an immense undertaking. Using international funds and a computer link in Beijing, Oxford, and here at Cornell, the team has built a unique database on life and death in China. Professor Colin Campbell.
We have about 367 items of information on people located in 130 villages across the country. Characteristics having to do with diet and the way in which people eat, and what they eat, and when they eat. We collected food, we collected blood from all the individuals aged 35 to 64. Urine samples were collected. We had people fill out questionnaires, and with this kind of information, I suspect that now it is, in fact, the largest and most comprehensive kind of study that has been undertaken on causes of disease.
Connections between lifestyle and disease are notoriously hard for scientists to pin down in the West, where food is varied and people move often. Not so in China. To a large extent, people live where they were born. Adults eat the same food cooked the same way as when they were children. China is a living human laboratory, perhaps the last place on Earth where this kind of work is possible.
Basically, we're undertaking a snapshot in time of China, and China's changing. China's changing rather rapidly. And so whereas in the past they were very immobile, the food that was being produced was always produced locally, and they had these very unique patterns of disease, that situation is not going to exist too much longer, because people are starting to move, and food is starting to be distributed in different parts of the country. So the country is going to be homogenized, if you will, somewhat like the West in time. And so it's terribly important right now to document what are those factors that really gave rise to those very different rates of disease in different parts of the country.
It's been a painstaking collaboration, with researchers from all over China studying every house in 130 villages. Food and drink is analyzed and weighed and sampled, and the results sent to the Institute of Nutrition in Beijing. The daily life of the Du family in Meilong village is now faithfully recorded in the computerized annals of international science. They found the major diseases of the old China are gone. But now, there are new ones.
Previously, we had a lot of infectious disease and parasitic diseases, and also some malnutrition. Now we have to facing another kind of type of diseases, that is so-called diseases of the affluence, which include the chronic heart disease and the diabetes, osteoporosis, hypertension, of these kind of things.
Questions about smoking were also part of the study. 40 years ago, when he was in his 20s, Du Ujin began smoking. Now he's had to give up the cigarettes he enjoyed because he has emphysema. Dr. Chen has found previous estimates of smoking in China to be understated.
From the data we got so far, we found that 75% of our male subjects who are 35 to 64 years old, 75% of them are current smokers. And the average amount of tobacco they smoked is roughly equal to the maximum amount of the tobacco used by the British men in 20 or 30 years ago. We are having more and more rural people smoking the manufactured cigarettes. And it is this kind of manufactured cigarettes which causes lung cancer and other health problems.
With this mounting evidence, why has it taken China so long to acknowledge the connection between smoking and lung cancer? One reason is that most cancers develop slowly.
Well, what's been so misleading in every single country is the long delay between when people start to smoke and when the mass of deaths appears. The thing is that if you want to kill yourself by smoking, then you have to start young. There's no use waiting till middle age before you start, because although you may manage to give yourself a heart attack, you won't give yourself lung cancer. It's those who start in their teens or early 20s and who keep smoking who are going to be at the highest risk of death in middle age. But what this means is that when there's a huge increase in smoking among the teenagers and the young adults, then it may be 40 years or more before you start seeing the main effects in middle age. So there's this long, deceptive delay. And that, I think, is what misleads people.
In crowded cafes and restaurants where people gather with family and friends, cigarettes have come to play an important role in socializing. Smoking promotes a sense of social acceptance for Chinese youngsters. Half of China's 1 billion population are under 25, and they are taking up smoking in record numbers.
Young people are the main builders of our country's future. They are what we call a society's pillar. Yet smoking is spreading among young people at great speed. It's like a contagious disease. They learn this bad habit from each other. If this goes on without being stopped, in 20 or 30 years' time, the backbone of our country will be the victims of smoking.
The school playground. Where better to impress your friends with your first cigarette? 15-year-olds are already smoking.
Does anyone in your family smoke?
Yes.
Who?
My father.
Your father? He smokes a lot?
1 pack a day.
That's quite a lot. Let me ask you, does anyone in your family smoke?
Yes, my dad.
Heavily?
Yes, pretty heavily.
In China, foreign cigarettes sell very well, but they're very expensive. So some people want them but can't afford them. The other thing is foreign cigarettes, their quality is better than the Chinese ones. So some people prefer smoking the foreign ones.
Even though they're bad for your health, sometimes they still do you good.
How do you mean good?
For example, if you're chatting with someone and you start talking about something that's kind of awkward and you don't know what to do, it helps to lighten things up.
You mean it helps socially?
Yes.
It is true that the number of young smokers has increased. As for the problem of their preference for foreign cigarettes, I think it has something to do with our open policy. More foreign goods are available now.
At one time, the Chinese government restricted sales of Western cigarettes to specially licensed places where foreign visitors shop. Foreign cigarettes became so highly prized that they were practically an alternative currency. The allure of this forbidden fruit and the desire for anything foreign made Western cigarettes impossible to resist. On Saturday nights at the Culture and Leisure coffee shop in central Beijing, the air is thick with their smoke. Here, trend-setting youths indulge their insatiable hunger for anything Western. The waitresses wear Western clothes. Fast food photos adorn the walls. And you eat in the dark with a knife and fork. But most important, you chain smoke Western cigarettes to show you can afford it. Although they are now widely available, these cigarettes cost more than domestic brands. International top-quality brands start at about $2 for 20. This is a far cry from the 90 cents a pack one would pay for Chinese cigarettes.
Smoking was rare 30 years ago, and none of the students smoked at that time. But since the Cultural Revolution, things changed a great deal. And now, we did a survey in 1986 in professional schools, high school, and about 50% percent of the students smoke are regular smokers, and nearly everyone experienced smoking sometime.
During the heyday of special privilege for Western powers in China, tobacco was already big business, and Shanghai was the hub of its empire. In the 20s, the enterprising sales force of British American Tobacco penetrated to the heart of the interior, bringing the novelty of cigarettes to a previously pipe-smoking population. The British-owned company had its own distribution network, and BAT produced the most colorful and sophisticated advertisements China had ever seen. By the 30s, BAT had captured 2/3 of the Chinese market, and its trademarks were known throughout the land. Equipped with the most advanced technology of the day, its factories employed thousands of Chinese workers. BAT's China Managing Director, James Thomas, wrote home to North Carolina. I went to China to introduce cigarettes into that country. When I arrived in Shanghai, I realized it was a difficult undertaking. But he succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. Concerns about the health effects of smoking were years away. For now, Chinese smokers were just good news for both Britain and the U.S.
Shanghai has a longer history of smoking than any other places in China. As a result, the lung cancer mortality rate of Shanghai doubles the national rate. And besides, generally, stomach cancer rate is the leading cause of cancer in Shanghai for many, many years. But since 1985, lung cancer rate exceeds that of stomach cancer and replaces it to be the leading cause of death of cancer in Shanghai.
Shanghai's European architecture reminds us of this pre-revolutionary era. The city still bustles with commercial confidence. But since the change of government in 1949, communist officials have found their own uses for buildings once occupied by prosperous British merchants. While political regimes have come and gone, one thing hasn't changed. BAT's cigarette factory, built in 1925, is still here and still going strong. The government's tobacco monopoly is now allowed to import foreign technology and improve its product. This is a British machine, but the Chinese workers call it the Great Wall because it just goes on and on. It can make 6,500 cigarettes a minute. Most national tobacco industries can only dream of China's annual output. 1.6 trillion cigarettes, the biggest in the world. The people of Shanghai learned to smoke cigarettes from foreigners. They've always prided themselves in their commercial openness to the outside world. Now history's coming full circle as imported cigarettes catch on like wildfire among the sophisticated youngsters who frequent the downtown cafes. They know what's in.
Marlboro and Kent is a fashionable cigarette. Some Chinese people like it. Why? Why? Because it's fashionable.
What brand do you smoke?
Marlboro. Usually I smoke 5 or 6 packs every month. It's my body maintenance.
How did you know about Marlboro?
There were ads on TV. That's where I saw people smoking them. So I bought a pack to try. And it did taste good. There are many foreign brands in China, but I would say Marlboro is one of the better ones. And the pack looks good too. Most Shanghainese like Marlboro.
Mostly I like Chinese cigarettes because they're not so strong. But sometimes I like to smoke some American cigarettes.
And what particular cigarette brands does he know?
35, British cigarettes, very famous. But nowadays it's not so popular as American cigarettes, like Good Company and Kent and Marlboro.
Tobacco advertising is restricted in China. Chinese cigarettes are not advertised at all. So to reach their new market, the international tobacco companies have to find methods of promotion other than direct advertisement. Right on the waterfront, here's State Express 555, one of BAT's best-known brands, and Kent. Both are well known to the Chinese public through sponsorship of famous and very popular sporting events.
After 6 days of hard driving, the Hong Kong-Beijing 555 State Express car rally reached its destination today. Car number 1, driven by 2 Swedes, was the winner. The 1987 Kent International Snooker Competition got off to a great start in the Beijing Stadium, with all 16 British and Chinese participants going through their paces. The top British player beat 8 Chinese and went through to the second round. We will be showing the semi-finals at 7 p.m. tonight, live from the stadium.
It should be clearly stated that the cigarette companies are rather cunning. Since they know direct advertising is impossible, they use deceit to get their commercials placed before the viewing audience. Sports should really be a means of healthy enjoyment and recreation for the public. But propaganda for smoking does precisely the opposite. It is damaging to health. So basically the two things conflict.
At peak viewing time, the television audience in Shanghai, China's biggest city, is around 10 million. Commercials are particularly popular. Along with the display of the new consumer products, washing machines, hi-fis, water softeners, comes this message. We asked a Shanghai consumer to translate the commercial.
It said, "With our spirits high, try our best to win. This is Marlboro's world. Welcome to the world of Marlboro."
And what product is being advertised?
Oh, it's the name of cigarette.
But we didn't see any cigarettes.
But everybody knows it's the name of cigarettes. Smoking is very popular in China, and more young people smoking. They feel smart and modern.
Public health officials are worried that China may relax its restrictions on cigarette advertising, making an already serious smoking problem worse. Studies show that while there are many reasons why people take up the habit, incidents of smoking increased in Asian countries where aggressive advertising has been allowed. almost 1/4 of the world's population lives in China, making it a prime target for Western tobacco companies. One way for them to ease into China is through Hong Kong, which in 1997 will be returned to Chinese control. Since 1841, when China was forced to cede Hong Kong to Great Britain, foreign traders have used it as the gateway to the huge Chinese market. This tiny port today is an international city of almost 6 million people with a booming free market economy. Hong Kong's flair for business has made it into a showcase of capitalism. While no one is certain what will happen after the territory returns to Chinese control, it is clear that in the meantime, business is thriving and may well continue to do so for some time. Hong Kong has proved to be an ideal base of operations for the Western tobacco companies in Asia, since it gave the companies the freedom to promote tobacco in ways long since banned at home. Philip Morris produced this commercial for the Chinese New Year of 1990. But the required warning at the bottom of the screen was a portent of things to come. Before the year was out, cigarette ads were banned from Hong Kong television and radio. But although Hong Kong's airwaves are clear, billboards and magazines still extol the virtues of smoking. Sporting events and even fashion wear keep brand names visible. But as in the West, tobacco companies now face a formidable challenge. Dr. Judith Mackay, a physician who has lived in Hong Kong for 26 years, directs the Asian Consultancy on Tobacco Control.
The Hong Kong government has grasped the nettle of tobacco control quite firmly, and in fact has shown not just Asia but indeed the world that if you get central government commitment and a tough policy, that an Asian country can indeed reduce its smoking rates by a combination of legislation and education and publicity and so on. And since 1982 the government have taken some really pretty tough measures, and indeed the number of smokers has gone down by 20% over a 4-year period. And it does show that basically it can be done, even against the foreign tobacco companies that dominate the market. China, of course, is the biggest developing country. It has a quarter of the world's population, so it is the promised land as far as the tobacco industry are concerned. And what is happening worldwide is that their markets are indeed falling in the West, in industrialized countries, at the rate of about 1% per annum. So simply to maintain their sales and indeed expand, they're looking towards the developing world. And the tobacco epidemic is already upon China. What we are witnessing at this very moment in China is a very aggressive promotion on the part of the foreign companies. And the Chinese own National Tobacco Corporation doesn't really have anything like that.
Hong Kong is a very free-wheeling, free market economy. And the reality is that Hong Kong looks just like tobacco country because there's advertising everywhere, on billboards, on the side of buildings. It really is a form of visual pollution. And I think that if China doesn't really come to grips with what could lie ahead with them now, then they too will simply become tobacco land. The kind of advertising, tobacco advertising, that we see in Hong Kong, it really simply portrays a glamorous, seductive, Western images, I might say. It's very rare to see a Chinese person in the advertisement. There is this promotion of Western culture and things Western, coupled with the healthy, sporty outdoor image that is particularly attractive and seductive towards young people. And it is young people who are lacking in adult judgment, it's young people who are lacking in full information about smoking, who are the most vulnerable to starting.
And young people seem to be a particular target of the tobacco companies. The R.J. Reynolds Company sponsors performers at this nightclub in return for the privilege of distributing its cigarettes free to customers. The other big companies have similar arrangements with other Hong Kong clubs, but they insist it's to encourage brand loyalty, not to recruit new smokers.
The U.S. tobacco industry goes to Asia and shows adolescents that smoking is something that's widespread among American youth. They link it with Western lifestyle, rock music, Madonna, Paula Abdul, and others. So the Asian youth who dreams about going to San Francisco or New York City thinks to be Western means to smoke. And that's the most unfair and deceptive message that any U.S. company can send to that part of the world.
There's some very good evidence that political pressure has been brought to bear on several governments in Asia, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and indeed in Hong Kong. When we banned smokeless tobacco in 1986, our government got a very threatening letter from Senator Bob Dole and other senators saying that we believe such action, the ban on smokeless tobacco, would constitute an unfair and discriminatory restriction on foreign trade. At least that is the way it is likely to be viewed in the United States. And at about the same time, Senator Jesse Helms wrote to the Prime Minister of Japan, Nagasone, saying that your friends in Congress will have a better chance to stem the tide of anti-Japanese sentiment if and when they can cite tangible examples of your doors being opened to American products. And tobacco, in fact, was the only American product that was mentioned in this letter.
Western tobacco seems irresistible to the Chinese, and the West wants to take full advantage of this fact. In October 1992, under threat of trade sanctions, China agreed to loosen restrictions on tobacco products from the United States.
The United States government is spending millions of dollars to get Americans to quit smoking, and they're winning the war against tobacco use. But at the same time, our trade office is waging a war internationally to promote smoking in Asia. If the multinational cigarette companies do come into China, an already bad problem will become much, much worse. Not only will the nation not adopt effective tobacco control policies, but you'll see sharp increased smoking rates among women and children.
Off the coast of South China, this seaport, once called Amoy, offers some insight into a century of strained relationships with the West. Elegant mansions recall the days when foreigners came to Amoy and built themselves and their families an elite domain. Here they lived comfortably for decades on the profits of foreign trade, including opium. Under the emperors, China carefully restricted trade with the outside world, but China was a huge unexploited market. The British challenged the restrictions in the name of free trade, launching 2 military expeditions, which came to be called the Opium Wars. British gunboats could shell the South China coast with impunity. The Chinese emperor had no modern navy. Amoy with its mud fort was taken with ease. Defeated, the Chinese were forced to lower trade restrictions through several ports. Amoy was one, Shanghai another. Foreigners insisted on paying for goods with opium until the beginning of this century, when they finally reduced the opium trade. Amoy, now called Xiamen, hurtles toward a new century. But history repeats itself as China's door is again wide open for business, and the tobacco companies are taking full advantage of the new rules. Xiamen is a special economic zone, one of China's showcase towns designed to attract foreign investment on easy terms. In line with free market principles, advertising restrictions are more relaxed. Western tobacco ads have sprung up at most of the prime positions. Since Western cigarettes have arrived, smokers treat themselves to the milder flavor of blended foreign brands whenever they can afford them. In Xiamen's local cigarette factory, a foreign company is turning out the first American brand made in mainland China. The staff of China's national tobacco monopoly makes Camel cigarettes here for RJR Nabisco China. It was Reynolds' first toehold in the market. And Reynolds scored another first, a joint venture, the China-American Cigarette Company. So now their cigarettes aren't treated as foreign anymore. Louis Chan, a party official with awards for initiative and enterprise, worked hard to pull off this deal for Xiamen.
The main products in our factory are the Reynolds brands, Winston, Salem, and Camel. And we have two new company brands, Jinqiao and Jasa. We've been in contact for a total of 9 years, and we had 30 negotiation sessions. Now we've come to an agreement, and the factory is built.
Other foreign companies have since established their own joint venture factories in China. But just recently, Chinese officials decreed that no more factories will be built, since production now far exceeds demand. And demand is the name of the game. Demand for Western cigarettes may bring cancer to Asia, but it also brings life to an ailing American economy. Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the heart of America's tobacco country. North Carolina is proud of the role tobacco plays in its history and its future.
The organization here tries to use the various arms of government and the various arms of the industry to get more tobacco in the world trading process. As far as what has been done recently in Southeast Asia, we see trade barriers that have been lifted regarding the manufactured products. Japan is our #1 importer of U.S. leaf tobacco. Now, we have been very successful in the exportation of the tobacco manufactured product into Japan, Taiwan, and the Korean area. The sales have just soared. We have been very successful in introducing the U.S. brands in these markets. We feel very optimistic about the possibility of selling more U.S. tobacco in the Far East. #1, you have more disposable income occurring in those countries. And one of the items that it seems that the smokers enjoy is a better cigarette. So in areas where they're changing from the roll-your-own to the manufactured cigarette, and then probably to a blended cigarette, that's where we fit into the marketplace, and we feel like we can provide the substance they need. We've made great headway through advertising and through the use of the Western style of promoting U.S. brands. We don't feel that it's enticing people to change from being smokers or non-smokers. It's merely providing a larger availability of product to the consumer there.
In Wilson, North Carolina, $3.5 million are changing hands today for some of the best tobacco leaf in the world. These buyers know exactly which leaves their industrial customers are after and how much to bid for them. They're offering top dollar for leaves at the top of the stock. Competition at the end of the season is tough. Half of this tobacco was bought for export by international leaf dealers. Since the U.S. government has successfully pressured Japan, Taiwan, Korea, and Thailand to accept American tobacco, Southeast Asia has become a major market.
Well, in the past few years, there have been tariff and other trade barriers removed from the export of U.S. cigarettes. In Japan, for example, tariff and other trade barriers were removed. Taiwan allowed the sales of U.S. cigarettes for the first time last year. Korea's market has opened up. And so, therefore, the U.S. cigarette manufacturers are exporting many more cigarettes abroad than they used to. So we think that all of these factors together bode very well, and that is why our production is up this year for the first time in 13 years.
Many times our opponents in the anti-smoking camp will claim that, well, cigarette sales are declining in the United States, and so therefore to expand their markets, the U.S. manufacturers must go abroad, and that we are using sophisticated Western marketing techniques on unsuspecting third world consumers. That is just outright balderdash. Those people have been smoking local indigenous tobacco for hundreds of years. What we're now trying to do is make available to them the best cigarettes in the world made with the best tobacco in the world. We believe if given a chance to compete in markets, we'll do well.
North Carolina growers know that their product is quite simply one of the most successful in America. Tobacco alone provides an almost $5 billion surplus to the balance of payments at a time of enormous national deficit. No wonder the effort to sustain tobacco exports is supported by the government. Robert Vick's crop has done better than expected at the sales. Despite this season's difficult weather conditions, he's been averaging about $1.70 per pound.
My brother and myself have a partnership. We grow 34 acres of tobacco. We're looking for selling somewhere around 75,000 pounds of tobacco this year. At this time, we've sold probably about 50% of the crop.
North Carolina farmers can and do grow other crops, but their state has the perfect conditions for growing tobacco. And no other crop can fetch the kind of money that tobacco can, especially for small family farms, which produce almost all of North Carolina's tobacco crop. Tobacco has long been a lifesaver for these families and for all the people who depend on them for their incomes. Tobacco is vital to the economy of North Carolina, as it is to the economy of China. The problem for China, much as it is in the United States, is that short-term economic benefits often seem to outweigh long-term health concerns.
I frequently have been pleased that I am not responsible for fixing the cigarette problem in China because it is huge. But let me remind you that just 25 years ago in the United States, more than half of our men smoked, and today it's only 29%. Now, how did we get there? It was a multifaceted program. We educated people. We put warnings on cigarettes. We cut down on the tar. We did everything we could. And I think China has to do everything that it can. You either say, we've got a bad problem and we're going to live with it, and face the fact that down the road you're going to have all the problems that go with the health issues. Or you say, we're going to do everything that we can, knowing it won't be perfect, but if we don't aim for perfection, we're not going to win anything.
The National Cancer Institute sponsored several programs to help the Chinese address their smoking problem.
The Cancer Institute is carrying out a clinical trial, a large clinical trial in southern China.
The late Dr. Joseph Cullen invited Chinese scientists to visit the National Cancer Institute.
We're delighted to have Dr. Yu here. We can show her the experience of this country in terms of what happened here and what's beginning to happen in her country.
Dr. Cullen feared that without legislation, China would have trouble restraining the Western companies from nudging their way into the market.
As a health official who's responsible for examining the ill effects of the use of tobacco and trying to do something about it, and having the mandate from our Congress to do that, that bothers me very much, because in this country we know this kills you, using this behavior. And how then we can take that kind of product and sell it to somebody else without the sanctions of the health ill effects is beyond my understanding. As a citizen, that bothers me. As a health official, I said it bothers me. And as I listen to many of the congressmen who are very passionate about this and very concerned about it, I must agree with them that I don't think we ought to be doing this. We shouldn't reap in somebody else's backyard what we don't want in our own backyard. Every country should look at itself and say, what do we want for our people? Is money the measuring stick for what we want for our people, or is it quality of life? And I would think that every government has to answer that in the latter, that we really want our people to live well. We certainly care about our children. Why would we want them beginning to take habits up that are going to compromise their life later on? Is that what we want? And I think we have to bite the bullet on that and make a decision. And in the case of China, they have the same thing. And since we know they love their children as much as anywhere in the world, since they can only have one, then that becomes preeminent among their decision-making.
Dr. Cullen died in 1990, a year before China passed its first ever tobacco law in June 1991. The law's provisions include the reduction of tar and other harmful substances in cigarettes and the placement of warning labels on cigarette packages. It also prohibits TV and radio advertisements and smoking in public places, particularly in elementary and high schools. But while addressing the health effects of smoking, the law reaffirms the government's monopoly on producing cigarettes.
The law certainly reflects the ambivalence that the Chinese government holds towards the tobacco industry. There is an inherent tension in this new law. On the one hand, you have provisions that, if successfully implemented, would decrease tobacco consumption and the demand for tobacco products. And then on the other hand, you have provisions that essentially ensures that the state will profit from the tobacco industry.
How well the law will be enforced remains to be seen. But China's tobacco law is perceived as a first step in addressing the country's growing problem.
It is important to have this law on the books and the health provisions in this law on the books, because law in China essentially serves the purpose of setting an agenda for the future. It shows a certain amount of commitment on the part of the Chinese government. But more will be needed. In China, there is a long tradition of using social coercion to regulate conduct instead of using formal law or the force of the state. So as far as this law is concerned, it will be unlikely that it will be fully implemented absent a massive public education or a massive political campaign behind it.
The health implications are absolutely tremendous. In a country like the United States, where we can ill afford $60 billion a year, the cost of cigarette smoking here, think what that is going to do when the health effects begin to be felt in developing nations around the world. Maybe I ought to give you my conclusion right now, and that it is reprehensible for industrial nations to export disease, disability, and death in the way of cigarette smoke to developing countries, putting on their backs a health burden that they will never be able to pay for 20 to 30 years down the road.
If smoking habits continue to increase, then the total number of children killed by smoking is going to be well over 50 million. The total number of deaths from smoking each year is going to be well over 2 million. On the other hand, if smoking decreases, then a lot of these deaths could be avoided, because stopping smoking works. When there's plenty of experience of that, people say, oh, I've been smoking so long it doesn't make any difference if I stop or not. But the fact is that stopping smoking really works. You avoid most of the risk of death from the habit. And so if something were done that did discourage people from smoking in China, then you could avoid tens of millions of deaths. Now, these are difficult choices to make because tobacco manufacture is such a major industry. But I think that what's needed is for the really top leaders to look at these numbers and to decide what they want to do about them.
a production of WGBH Boston. Funding for NOVA is provided by Lockheed, America's aerospace company, supporting math, science, and engineering education for national technology leadership, and Johnson & Johnson, the signature recognized around the world for commitment to quality healthcare products for the entire family. Major funding for NOVA is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you. Teachers, educational institutions, and organizations can purchase this and many other programs from NOVA's 20th anniversary season for $19.95 plus shipping and handling. To order a video cassette, call 1-800-255-9424.
This is PBS.
Next time on NOVA. On patrol in the Persian Gulf. Tensions remain high. Top Gun pilots are at the ready, catapulting into the air at 150 miles an hour, then landing caught only by a hook. 5,000 men keep 80 planes constantly in the air, alert and ready to carry out any mission assigned to the aircraft carrier. That's next time on NOVA.
For a transcript of the NOVA program you've just seen, send $5 to this address or call 1-303-831-9000.